Go.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Today we are hopefully finishing off the doctrine of sanctification. Shirley Guthrie, this is his, after this chapter, we have two more to go. And we are, I believe, on Roman numeral 4, the holiness that Jesus commands. And I think last week we finished off with holiness and the use of force. Is that correct? Where we talked about the use of force should only be a last resort. Like if someone comes up to you and says, "I don't like your cooking," you probably shouldn't knock their teeth out. You should probably seek dialogue first, right?
Or walk away.
Or walk away, right. But Guthrie also discussed and said, look, there are the opportunities where, sometimes you just can't walk away, right? But Guthrie says, but these should be your last resort. If you have to do it, make sure it's, the last thing. I think his main point of the section is, we should not be a violent people. I think that's the main thrust. He's saying if we're Christians, we should be peaceful people seeking peaceful resolution. Right. But it doesn't mean that there are not the times where, where we must do it. Good morning.
Hello.
All right, so we are now on holiness and family responsibility, the second to last, so we're on C. For some people, nothing may be more important than husband or wife, children or parents, brother or sister. Other people may believe everything else should be sacrificed for the good of their own family. Me and my family and me, nothing can take precedence over our happiness, comfort, security, and responsibility to and for one another. However, the disciples of Jesus are called to be holy. They do not live by the standards of the world, not even by its highest standards. They are commanded to renounce any absolute attachment to family. They may have to break with family, sacrifice the best interests of family, disturb peace and harmony within the family. They may actually be called to hate not father and mother, spouse and children as such, but the idolatrous worship of family and the enslaving hold family members can have on one another. So we think about some of the things that occurred within Jesus' ministry. When we think about how Jesus viewed his own earthly family, I love the one passage, and I believe it's in Mark. Mark does a great job at illustrating it. I believe, if it is the gospel I'm thinking of, when Jesus is teaching and someone said, "Hey, Jesus, your mom and your siblings are outside," and and how does Jesus respond to that?
These are my brothers and sisters and mother.
Yeah, and remember, it's not that his family is indignant to Jesus, but, I don't believe that they're fully on board yet, right? Especially his siblings. And they're not, and we know that they're not on board yet. I don't know if they think that, he's more of a zealot, or we don't know
He's just plain nuts.
Yeah, we don't know. He keeps walking around saying he's a Messiah. We don't know how far his family thinks on that spectrum, but we do know there's this disconnect. And there is a disconnect with Jesus as well. Not in a negative way, but he is showing that my family is all of you. It's not just my earthly family, but it's all of you. Think about the difficult and it is a difficult passage, especially when you are newer to the Christian faith, when Jesus says, I have not come, to bring peace. I have come to sow discord. I have come to separate, right, and divide. And he starts saying, father to son, mother to daughter, and you listen to this and you're like, whoa, what is he talking about, right? This is the Prince of Peace, what is he talking about with that? And you think about in the ancient world where everyone has had their faith, and I mean generations. I don't care if you were Jewish and you have had the law of Moses with you for centuries, or if you were Roman and you had your household deities, or Greek, or a Spaniard, or you were from North Africa, or from the many Arabic tribes in that region. Everyone has had their systems for centuries. Now you give that all up for this new understanding of who God is and the closeness of who God is. Now that's fantastic. We cheer that and say these are our roots. But think about what's going on within these units, right? Now all of a sudden, Uncle Jack, who has worshipped the Roman deities for his whole life, now throws all of this away, right? All of these things are cast out, and now he is a worshiper of this guy, Jesus of Nazareth. What does that do to a family? Well, what do you mean you worship some Jew from Palestine? What are you talking about, Uncle Jack? Imagine how this shatters family units. Imagine what it does. Imagine what it did in Palestine, in Judea, when you have people who are traditional Jews, and now you have Jews who now follow this Messiah, right? It divides, it splits.
Well, under tribal mentality.
And it's tribal mentality. It's betrayal.
Until today, I think
Still.
today, you do something, you betray the tribe.
Still, most definitely. Most definitely. My family, I mean, if you do something to the family, I mean, it's bad. The whole family kind of gels. I mean, it's very clannish. And you understand that tribal mentality. Because, and the saying, blood is thicker than water, right? And so you feel betrayed. And so when we think about holiness and family responsibilities, when Jesus says, when the guy who wants to follow Jesus, wait, I need to bury my father. And Jesus is like, no, man, there's no time for that. It's not, and what we must understand about that passage, it's not that the dad just died and Jesus is saying, don't worry about funeral plans, let's go. He means I need to stick around until my father passes away.
Right.
Then I must take care of these duties. And Jesus is saying there is no time for that, right? So when we think about some of the challenges that Jesus of Nazareth lays out, they're tough. And they do challenge this tribal mentality, as Alejandro said. It does. It challenges it all. Not just in Jesus' region, but really within the entire Mediterranean world. And then it goes, as it moves out, it does the same wherever it hits. Wherever it hits. We must understand that the gospel always, it should always have this edge to it. It should have that sharp edge that goes against the grain. As my professor in seminary always said, we cannot make it a pet. You cannot domesticate the gospel to where it's your pet, that you can walk on a leash and it's tame. That's when it's no longer, that's when the salt loses its saltiness, right, as Jesus would say.
Definition, or whatever you want to do.
Yeah, that the gospel must always be revolutionary. It must always, cause at least you to stop and think and say, ooh, this is tough. This is a challenge, right? And think about Jesus. He is continually challenging people face to face. He doesn't push them. He lays a challenge out. This is what it costs. You want to follow? This is what it costs. Some say yes and they follow. Some say no and they walk away, and Jesus goes on too. So when we think about holiness and family responsibilities, and it's not that Jesus is anti-family either. I think people sometimes will go too far, right? We're still to honor our parents. We are still to care. Think about Paul's letters. I'm trying to remember if it was Timothy or Titus, where he talks about elders and especially ministers. Ministers must be able to take care of their family unit. If they can't do that, how can they take care of God's family if they can't even take care of their own family? Which ministers' kids are always so volatile, which it's like, am I doing okay? How are we doing? My goodness gracious. When you look at that litmus, it's kind of scary. So we are still called to care for our earthly family and love our earthly family, but it does not supersede, right? And again, it's this break from tribalism, right? And I love what Alejandra said, because that's really what it is. And this is every culture. Every culture gets like that. You know, it gets defensive. It's our way, our traditions, our everything, right? And when you think about how the gospel comes in, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to give up and forfeit everything. But, you know, the gospel comes first. The gospel comes first. And everyone, because really the church is kind of like one gigantic adoptive family. You know, that's what it is. Jesus did not set up this system for individuals. It's communal. It's a community. The system is set as a community because, right, 3 chords are stronger than 1 chord, right, as we look at it, right, out of Ecclesiastes. So the church is a unit, right? It's one, but it's put together of millions of people. Right?
Ali, where did you find this? Where did you say that? That the Lord's Prayer is all
It's in
the
plural.
plural. Give us our daily bread. You know, not give me my daily bread. Not,
Right.
You know, it's
Right.
a community. It's a.
It is the community. It is all about the community. The way Presbyterians, so Reformed theologians, the way we even look at the sacraments, it's all about the community. You know, Don and Ann can't have me for supper one night and say, "Hey, let's have communion." We can't do that, right? If as a minister, if we're going to offer communion, if I meet with the elders in a session and we said, yes, let's have communion, and we can do communion, we can do it once a Sunday, we can do it really, you know, we can offer it midweek, but it must be offered to the entire community of faith, right? Now, there's always exceptions, like if someone's on their deathbed, you know, and they want communion, you know, we shouldn't be so rigid that we say, sorry, it's not the right Sunday.
Yeah.
But on a regular basis, this is how we look at communion. Baptism is the same, right? I just can't baptize. I can't go to someone's house and they say, hey, you know, Susie over here would love to be baptized. You know, I just can't take them out to their pool and baptize them, right? It's got to be within the community, right? And when we do baptize people, it's remember your own baptism, right? It's part of the community. It holds things together. So we witness this, right? And we remember our baptized, and the community is promising to help raise this young person in the Christian tradition. Or if it's an adult, you promise to support them and disciple them and help them along the way. It's all communal. It's all communal. Yes, sure, there's the individual aspect to it. You can't get around that. But it really is, it's all communal. It's all, when you think about what Jesus set up, it's the church, right? Mm-hmm. So like our Roman Catholic brothers and sisters who say there is no salvation outside of the church, right? This is why excommunication is a big deal, to where we don't go that far. But you can see the purpose of it. You can see the essence in that within the scriptures as well. You can see that Jesus sets up the church because this is the method. This is the vehicle. Right? It is through the church. It is through the church. Right? It's an important piece. All right, so the last piece to holiness that Jesus commands is holiness and piety. Some people may think they are good when they obey the law, not killing, committing adultery, stealing, swearing, and so on. When they pray, go to church, and give a little money to help others, and when they preserve their own moral and religious integrity by avoiding the company of those whose morality, patriotism, and religious sincerity are questionable. But Jesus and his followers are different. They are not merely moral, religious, and pure, they are holy. On the one hand, their righteousness is more like that of others. Strict legal faithfulness to one's spouse does not make one an innocent party in the marriage, and the marriage itself a sound one. Inner fidelity is what really matters. One can legally be innocent and yet just as guilty of adultery as someone who sleeps around. Not killing is not enough. Hating another person is just as bad. Loving only those who are like oneself in taste, ways of life, political and theological views, and race is not enough. Holy people love their enemies. On the other hand, the non-conforming holiness of Jesus and his followers can break moral and religious conventions that seem absolute to others. Those who follow Jesus may seem irreligious because they refuse to advertise their piety. They do their praying in private rather than at football games. They do their giving in secret rather than publicizing their tithing. They risk seeming immoral and politically subversive because they have the wrong friends and do not let their friendship with undeserving sinners be stopped by the warning that birds of a feather flock together. All right? So when we think about holiness and piety, it's really this almost like this fork, right? And there's two sides to this. The first side is, just doing enough, right? And Jesus has a field day with this within the Beatitudes, right? Within the Sermon on the Mount. Think about it, right? When he says, you don't commit murder. Well, that's fantastic. Good for you. When you think about your brother or sister angrily, you've already killed them. That's hard.
To be that easy.
That's hard. Think about how hard that is. And that's why it's almost comical when people say, Jesus makes it so much easier. And I said, have you read the New Testament? I wouldn't necessarily say he makes it easier. But, think about what he says, okay, you don't commit adultery. Well, that's great. If you look at someone and cause them to lust, you've already done it. You've already committed adultery, right? So Jesus goes one step further, right? And so when people say, well, it's easier now, my response is, I don't think so. I think it's a lot harder now. Is it doable? With God's help? Sure. But if we just go at it on ourselves, I don't know. It's rough. It really is hard. Loving someone who already loves you. You can almost hear Jesus say, big deal. You're loving someone who already loves you back. Yeah, that's nice. Try loving someone who hates you. That takes merit. That takes effort. That takes effort, right? So when you think about some of these things that Jesus lays out, it makes things much, much more difficult. And then when you think about the other things and how Jesus' society rolled out, it's not praying in public. It's find yourself a quiet spot and pray in silence. When you give, I love the expression, don't let your right hand know what your left hand is giving. Even let it be a secret to you. Don't make a big thing about it. Just give and be happy. When you think about some of these things that Jesus is saying, he is what it truly means to be pious. And then on the opposite spectrum, Jesus coins, or I don't know if he coins the term, but uses the term self-righteous. Yeah. And what does the term self-righteous mean? When you think about it. When he says you're self-righteous.
You think you're good,
Yeah.
even if Maybe
Yeah.
you're not so good.
Yeah, yeah. We think about the image of the broken sinner in the temple, and he's, praying, I think he's beating his chest. And then we think about the religious leader who says, "Thank you for not making me like this guy." And then you see, okay, what is pious and what is self-righteous, right? There is definitely a line to be drawn. So when we think about holiness and piety, and the whole piece of holiness, remember, it's we are set apart, right? To be holy, to be sanctified, because that's what we're talking about, right? It's sanctification. To be sanctified is to be, in essence, you get this image of being pulled out, set apart. But not like pulled out, set apart to be put on a shelf or in your own universe. You're kind of pulled out, set apart, but then you're kind of plopped right back down in society, right? Because this is where we live. This is our home. These are our people, all of them. So if people get on to you because, you shouldn't hang out with those kind of people, who did Jesus hang out with?
The worst of the worst.
Yeah. And I love the expression when Jesus says a doctor comes to people who need him. If people are sick or hurting, that's where the doctor goes. To those who need the doctor's help. Right? And this is Jesus's, almost becomes like a mantra, right? And so people are drawn to him because he's not judging them. He's offering them either a way out or offering them love, stuff that they haven't seen before. When he gathers with all these tax collectors and he's reclining at the table with them, and the religious leaders are like, blowing a head gasket. Oh my God, does he even know who he's eating with? And Jesus could hear, of course I know who I'm eating. Right? And this is why, we have to remind ourselves who we sit at a table with is very intimate, and especially in the first century within the Mediterranean world, right? In first century Palestine, if you recline at the table with someone, you better kind of know them. You don't invite your enemies over, and we don't even do that today, right? You don't invite people you really don't like to your house, right? You invite people you like, right? Your friends. Oh, I don't know. I see you smiling. I don't even want to breach that subject.
It's being recorded, sir.
It's being recorded, so be careful. So be careful. It's right. It's being recorded. It's on tape. So yeah, but think about when we share a meal with someone, when we break bread with people. It's typically friends. It's family, right? It's people we know or that we want to get to know better. It's an intimate space. And so as Jesus breaks bread with these people, it drives the religious leaders bananas. Because you shouldn't be sitting with these people. They're unclean. You're going to be unclean now. Why would you do this? Right? And so when we think about the examples, right, that Jesus lays down, right, and this is what we are as Christians to do, imitate his life, right? This is what we must do also, right? We must not worry about, my gosh, what would the neighbors think? We say these things too. We say them too, right? And you hear, and I love, the birds of a feather flock together. I think about, the lessons that my own parents gave me, and I'm not saying that these are bad lessons, right? Of, choose your friends wisely. And I think that's different. I think they're trying to protect you, right? But, it's this, we can go too far with that, right? If you don't acknowledge, these men or women, these are still God's children. And God needs them to be loved. They are valued by God, right? They were valuable to Jesus, so they should be valuable to us, right? No one was so far gone that Jesus wouldn't sit and spend time with. No one. Think about Jesus' ministry, right? And this is what we're called to do as well, right? We are called to be holy people, but we are not called to be self-righteous people, right? We must be careful with piety. We must be careful not to be legalistic people, so rigid that you can't bend, that you can't help, right? We are not created to live in ivory towers. We are created to live in the valleys and on the mountaintops, right? And think of the message of the Transfiguration, right? Life is, there are highs and lows. There are exciting times and there are boring times and there are hard times and there are times where it's just grinding and you're thinking, my gosh, will I ever get out of this, right? But that's life. It's up and down these mountains. Up, highs, lows, all boring times, the whole gamut, right? But that's life, right? If they stood on top of that mountain and created those booths, they would have missed out on ministering when they came down, right? I think that was when they came down and there was someone who was possessed when they came down from the mountain after the Transfiguration. You know, there was work to be done. There were people to be ministered to, right? And so Jesus saying, we can't. You cannot remain in the ecstasy, you know, because there are other things that life has too. All right, so this finishes up sanctification. Any questions about this chapter? All right, next week we will begin section 18, and it's on the doctrine of the church.
Thank you.
You're welcome.